Story outline: Blood of the Innocent Part 1. The execution's shadow character, Marcus Thorne. A 12-year-old boy who witnesses his mother Elena's wrongful execution for allegedly poisoning the Duke's son. The real culprit, court physician Benedict Aldrich, watches from the crowd as an innocent woman dies for his crime. Part 2. The exile's return character, Cassandra Vale, a former court investigator, now in exile, who knew Elena was innocent. 20 years later, she returns to find Marcus has become a skilled healer, and together they begin uncovering the truth about the conspiracy that destroyed his family. Part 3. The merchant's gambit character, Tobias Reed, a wealthy merchant who was Elena's secret lover and Marcus's true father. He has spent decades gathering evidence and allies, waiting for the right moment to expose the corruption that killed the woman he loved. Part 4. The assassin's conscience character, Raven Blackwood, a deadly assassin hired to eliminate Marcus before he can reveal the truth. But when she discovers he's trying to save children with the same rare disease that killed the Duke's son, she must choose between her contract and her conscience. Part 5. The crown's justice character, Princess Serafina, the Duke's daughter, now heir to the throne, who uncovers her father's role in the conspiracy. She must decide whether to protect her family's legacy or deliver justice for the innocent woman who died 20 years ago. Part 1. The execution's shadowed morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Aldermere's central square like the breath of ghosts, and perhaps that was fitting. Marcus Thorne pressed himself against the rough stone wall of the baker's shop, his 12-year-old frame trembling not from the autumn chill, but from the terrible knowledge of what was about to unfold. "Please," he whispered to no one, his small fists clenched tight. "Please don't let this happen." But the gods, it seemed, had turned their faces away from the Thorne family. The crowd was already gathering, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and righteous anger. Marcus recognized many of them: the fishmonger's wife who had always smiled at him, the blacksmith who had taught him to shoe horses, the tavern keeper who had slipped him sweet cakes when his mother Elena worked late into the night, grinding herbs and mixing medicines. Now they looked at him with suspicious eyes, whispering behind cupped hands. The son of a murderer, they called him, the devil's spawn, as if guilt could be inherited like the color of one's eyes or the shape of one's nose. "There she is," someone hissed, and Marcus's heart shattered all over again. His mother walked between two guards, her hands bound with thick rope that had already rubbed her wrists raw. Elena Thorne had always been beautiful, the kind of beauty that came from kindness rather than powder and paint. Her dark hair, usually braided with care, hung loose and tangled around her shoulders. Her green dress, the one she wore to market on special occasions, was torn and stained from her weeks in the dungeon. But it was her eyes that destroyed him. Those warm brown eyes that had sung him lullabies and kissed away his tears now held a resignation that no innocent person should ever carry. She found him in the crowd, her gaze cutting through the sea of hostile faces like a blade through silk. For one precious moment, mother and son looked at each other across the square, and Elena's lips curved in the gentlest of smiles. She mouthed words he couldn't hear but understood perfectly. "I love you." Marcus tried to push forward, tried to reach her, but strong hands grabbed his shoulders and pulled him back. He twisted around to see Father Matthias, the old priest who had been his mother's friend since childhood. "Don't look, boy," the priest whispered urgently. "Remember her as she was, not as they would make her." But Marcus couldn't look away. This was his mother. If she was brave enough to face this horror, then he would be brave enough to witness it. The platform stood in the center of the square like a wooden altar, built for the cruelest of gods. Duke Aldwin himself sat in a high-backed chair to one side, his face carved from granite, showing neither mercy nor doubt. Beside him stood his son's empty chair, a reminder of the boy who had died so suddenly, so mysteriously, sending the duchy into a frenzy of grief and rage that demanded blood in return. Court physician Benedict Aldrich stood near the Duke, his silver-bearded face solemn as he watched the proceedings. He was the one who had discovered the poison, the one who had traced it back to Elena's workshop, the one whose testimony had sealed her fate. Marcus had always admired the learned doctor, had dreamed of perhaps studying under him one day. Now, the sight of him made Marcus's stomach turn with a hatred he was too young to understand, but too old to ignore. The herald stepped forward, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. "Elena Thorne, you have been found guilty of the murder of Lord Edmund Aldwin, heir to the Duchy of Valdres. The court has shown mercy in granting you a clean death by hanging rather than the traditional punishment of burning for poisoners. Have you any last words?" Elena lifted her chin, and for a moment she looked like the queen of some far-off kingdom rather than a condemned healer. "I am innocent," she said, her voice clear and strong despite everything. "I have spent my life healing the sick and easing pain. I would never harm a child, most especially not Lord Edmund, whom I delivered into this world with my own hands." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably, remembering the babies Elena had saved, the fevers she had broken, the wounds she had cleaned and bound. But the Duke's face remained unmoved, and the executioner stepped forward with his rope. "Furthermore," Elena continued, and Marcus felt his heart swell with fierce pride at his mother's courage, "I forgive those who have condemned me, for they know not what they do. The truth will come to light, as truth always does. Justice may be delayed, but it cannot be denied forever." Her eyes found Marcus again, and this time she spoke directly to him, her voice carrying across the square like a benediction. "My son, my beloved boy, remember that love is stronger than hate, that healing is more powerful than harming, and that the truth is worth any sacrifice. Live with honor, and know that I am proud to be your mother." The tears Marcus had been holding back finally came, streaming down his face in hot rivers. He watched through blurred vision as they placed the noose around his mother's neck. As she closed her eyes and whispered what looked like a prayer, the executioner looked to the Duke for the signal. Duke Aldwin raised his hand, paused for a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, then let it fall. The trap door opened. Marcus's scream tore through the morning air like the cry of a wounded animal, raw, primal, and full of more pain than any child should ever have to bear. Father Matthias tried to turn him away, tried to shield him from the sight, but it was too late. The image was burned into his memory forever, his mother's final moment, the injustice of it, the terrible wrongness that would haunt him for the rest of his days. As the crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves about justice served and order restored, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Court physician Benedict Aldrich was walking away from the platform, and on his face was not the grim satisfaction of a man who had seen justice done, but the subtle relief of someone who had just watched his greatest secret die with the condemned. "Come, boy," Father Matthias said gently, his own eyes wet with tears. "There's nothing more to be done here." But Marcus knew better, as he let the priest lead him away from the square, where his mother's body still swayed in the morning breeze. He made a silent vow that would shape the rest of his life. The truth would come to light, just as his mother had promised. Justice might be delayed, but it would not be denied forever. And somehow, someday, he would make sure that the real murderer paid for what he had done. The crowd had called him the devil's spawn, the son of a murderer. Very well, if that was what they believed, then perhaps it was time for them to learn what the devil's spawn could accomplish. When driven by love, loss, and an unshakable faith in his mother's innocence, Marcus Thorne walked away from his childhood. That morning, leaving it behind in the shadow of the execution platform, what emerged in its place was something harder, more determined, and infinitely more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The real story was just beginning. Part 2. The exiles returned. 20 years had passed since Elena Thorne's execution, and the kingdom of Valdres had convinced itself that justice had been served. The plague that had taken young Lord Edmund was a distant memory, filed away with other tragedies that people preferred not to discuss. But some wounds never heal, and some secrets refuse to stay buried. Cassandra Vale pulled her hood lower as she rode through the gates of Aldermere, her horse's hooves clicking against the same cobblestones where she had once walked as the kingdom's most trusted investigator. The city had grown in her absence. New buildings crowded the skylines. Merchant stalls spilled into streets that had once been orderly, and the faces she passed were all strangers. Good. She preferred it that way. 20 years of exile had changed her. The bright-eyed young woman who had once served the crown with unwavering loyalty was gone, replaced by someone harder, more cautious, and infinitely more dangerous. Her auburn hair, now streaked with premature silver, was cut short for practicality. Her green eyes, once warm with idealism, had been tempered by too many disappointments and too much solitude. She had been the kingdom's most promising investigator, handpicked by Duke Aldwin himself to solve the most complex cases. She had a gift for seeing patterns others missed, for following threads of evidence that seemed impossibly tangled. But that gift had become a curse when she had begun to see patterns in young Edmund's death that no one wanted her to find. The official story was neat, clean, and utterly wrong. A grieving mother seeking revenge for her own child's death. A healer gone mad with jealousy. Poison slipped into medicine with calculated malice. It satisfied the court's need for swift justice and the people's hunger for someone to blame. But Cassandra had seen the inconsistencies. The timing was wrong. The poison was wrong. Most damning of all, Elena Thorne's character was wrong. Cassandra had investigated the woman thoroughly, had spoken to dozens of patients, had reviewed years of meticulous records, had even observed Elena at work. Everything she learned painted the picture of a woman incapable of harming anyone, let alone a child. When Cassandra had tried to present her concerns to Duke Aldwin, she had been told to close the case and move on. When she had persisted, she had been warned. When she had continued investigating in secret, she had been framed for theft and exiled under pain of death. But exile had given her something precious: time to think, to research, to gather allies in distant kingdoms who owed no loyalty. To Valdres, time to piece together a conspiracy that reached higher than she had ever imagined. Now she was back, and she was not alone. The inn she chose was deliberately unremarkable, the sort of place where travelers passed through without leaving impressions. She paid the innkeeper for a room overlooking the street and settled in to watch. Old habits died hard, and surveillance was still second nature to her. It didn't take long to spot him. Marcus Thorne, though he no longer used that name, emerged from a narrow alley carrying a leather satchel that Cassandra recognized as a healer's kit. 20 years had transformed the terrified boy she remembered into a man of 32, tall and lean with his mother's dark hair and gentle brown eyes. But there was steel beneath that gentleness now, a controlled intensity that spoke of someone who had learned to channel grief into purpose. He moved through the crowded street with the confident stride of someone who belonged, nodding to merchants and exchanging quiet words with mothers who clutched sick children. The people trusted him. Cassandra realized, whatever name he used now, whatever story he told about his past, he had built a life here as a healer, just like his mother. Cassandra waited until evening before making her approach. She found him in the same narrow alley, cleaning instruments, by lamplight in what appeared to be a makeshift clinic. When her shadow fell across his workbench, he looked up without surprise. "I wondered when you would come," he said quietly, his voice carrying the same measured calm she had heard in Elena's. Final words. "Cassandra Vale, the king's lost investigator. You remember me?" "I remember everything about that day." Marcus set down his scalpel and truly looked at her for the first time. "You were the only one who questioned the official story, the only one who seemed to care whether my mother was actually guilty." Cassandra stepped into the circle of lamplight, pushing back her hood. "I was also the only one who paid the price for asking inconvenient questions. They exiled me 3 months after your mother's execution, because you got too close to the truth, because I discovered who really killed Lord Edmund." She watched his face carefully, looking for the reaction she expected. She was not disappointed. Marcus's hands stilled completely, his entire body going rigid with sudden attention. "You know who did it. I've spent 20 years gathering proof, but I need your help to expose it." "Why?" The word came out sharper than he had intended. "Why now? Why me? My mother is dead. Nothing we do can bring her back." Cassandra pulled a letter from her coat, weathered and yellowed with age. "Because it's happening again." Marcus took the letter with hands that trembled slightly as he read. His face grew pale in the lamplight. It was a report from a town 3 kingdoms away. describing a mysterious illness that had struck the children of several prominent families. The symptoms were identical to those that had killed Lord Edmund 20 years ago. The same poison. Cassandra said softly, the same method, the same type of victims. Children of the wealthy and powerful, and in each case, a local healer, was blamed and executed. Marcus looked up from the letter, his mother's eyes blazing with a fury that had been banked for 2 decades. How many? 7 towns, 12 children dead, 8 healers executed. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. All of them women. All of them known for their skill and compassion. All of them innocent. And you think the same person who killed Edmund is responsible for all of this? I know he is. Cassandra pulled out a small vial filled with crystalline powder. This is the poison that killed your mother's patients. Not the one they claimed to find in her workshop, but the real one. It's derived from a rare fungus that grows only in the deep caves of the northern mountains. It takes extensive alchemical knowledge to refine it properly, and even more skill to administer it without being detected. Marcus stared at the vial as if it contained liquid death, which in many ways it did. Court physician Benedict Aldrich, the only person in the kingdom with both the knowledge and the access required. He's been traveling regularly for the past 20 years, consulting with noble families across the realm. Every town where children have died, every healer who has been executed. Benedict Aldrich was there within weeks of the incidents. But why? Marcus's voice cracked with the weight of old grief. Why kill children? Why frame innocent healers? Cassandra had spent 20 years asking herself the same question, and the answer she had finally uncovered was more horrifying than the crimes themselves. Because he's not just a killer, Marcus, he's a collector. Each time he murders a child and frames a healer, he eliminates a potential rival while positioning himself as the kingdom's greatest medical authority. The healers he targets aren't chosen randomly. They're the most skilled, the most beloved, the most likely to eventually surpass his reputation. He's been murdering the competition for 20 years. Your mother was just the first. Cassandra leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. But she was also the most dangerous to him, because she had discovered something that could have exposed his entire scheme. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. What did she discover? The antidote. Cassandra pulled out a second vial, this one filled with a pale blue liquid. Your mother was working on a cure for the poison that killed Edmund. She was close to a breakthrough when Benedict realized what she was doing. He couldn't let her succeed, because the existence of an antidote would have proven that Edmund's death was deliberate murder, not a random poisoning. So he killed her first and destroyed all her research. Or so he thought. Cassandra smiled grimly. Your mother was too careful for that. She hid copies of her work, scattered them in places only someone who knew her well would think to look. Marcus was very still, processing everything she had told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady as stone. What do you need from me? Help me finish what she started. We have the evidence to expose Benedict Aldrich, but we need more than proof of his guilt. We need to save the children who are still at risk. She gestured to the makeshift clinic around them. You've become a healer, just like your mother. You have the skills to perfect her antidote, to make sure no more innocents die. And then we make him pay for every life he's taken, every family he's destroyed. Cassandra's eyes glittered with cold fire. Your mother promised that the truth would come to light. It's time to keep that promise. Marcus stood slowly, his decision already made. 20 years of carefully controlled rage had been building toward this moment, and he would not waste it. What's the first step? Cassandra smiled, and for the first time in decades, it was genuinely warm. We're going to steal Benedict Aldrich's private journals, and then we're going to destroy him. The hunt had finally begun. Part 3. The merchant's Gambith merchant ship Fortune's Grace cut through the harbor waters of Aldermere, like a blade through silk, her black sails bearing the silver tree emblem that had become synonymous with wealth and influence across 3 kingdoms. At her helm stood Tobias Reed, a man whose reputation for fair dealing and shrewd negotiations had made him one of the most powerful traders in the known world. What the world didn't know was that every coin he had earned, every alliance he had forged, Every carefully calculated business venture had been part of a 20-year plan for revenge. Tobias was 52 now, his dark hair touched with distinguished silver at the temples, his green eyes sharp with intelligence and something deeper, a carefully banked fury that had never quite extinguished. He wore wealth well, from his perfectly tailored coat to the emerald ring on his finger, but those who looked closely might notice that his hands bore the calluses of a man who had once worked much harder for much less. 20 years ago, he had been Tom Reed, a young merchant's apprentice with big dreams and empty pockets. He had also been desperately, completely in love with Elena Thorne. Their affair had been a secret by necessity. Elena was a respected healer, a woman whose reputation depended on maintaining propriety. Tom was nobody special, ambitious, but poor, clever but common-born. They had met when he brought his sick master to her for treatment, and what began as gratitude had blossomed into something that changed both their lives forever. Elena had been married to a man named Thorne, a blacksmith, who drank too much and died young in a tavern brawl. She had taken his name for respectability, but she had given her heart to Tom Reed. For 3 precious years, they had stolen moments together, meetings in hidden gardens, letters passed through trusted friends, dreams shared and whispered, conversations about a future that seemed impossible. Then Elena had told him she was pregnant. Tom had wanted to marry her immediately, consequences be damned. But Elena was wiser, more practical. A marriage between a respected healer and a penniless apprentice would have destroyed her practice and condemned their child to poverty. She convinced him to wait, to build his fortune first, to create a life worthy of the family they wanted to have. So Tom had left Aldermere with a broken heart and iron determination. He had sailed to distant ports, worked trades that more cautious men avoided, taken risks that should have killed him a dozen times over. Every venture was motivated by the same driving need, to become the kind of man Elena Thorne could marry. Without shame, he had been in the Eastern Kingdoms, negotiating a particularly lucrative spice contract, when word reached him of Elena's execution. The news had nearly destroyed him. For weeks, he had drunk himself senseless in foreign taverns, picking fights with strangers and hoping someone would put him out of his misery. It was a letter from an old friend in Aldermere that had finally saved him, a letter that mentioned Elena's son, Marcus, his son. The boy Tom had never met, but had unknowingly worked to provide for every day of his life. The grief that had nearly killed him transformed into something else, purpose. Cold and clean and absolutely unstoppable, Tom Reed the failed lover died. In that tavern, what emerged was Tobias Reed the merchant prince, a man with unlimited resources and unlimited patience, who would spend the next 20 years positioning himself for the perfect revenge. Now, as his ship docked in Aldermere's harbor, that patience was finally about to be rewarded. Master Reed, his first mate called, "The harbor master's boat is approaching." Tobias nodded, straightening his coat and adopting the genial expression he had perfected over decades of negotiation. The harbor master of Aldermere was a petty official with expensive tastes and flexible morals. Exactly the sort of man Tobias had been cultivating for years. "Master Reed," Harbor Master Gavin called, as he climbed aboard, his round face flushed with excitement. "Welcome back to Aldermere. I trust your voyage was profitable." "Extremely," Tobias replied, pressing a purse heavy with gold into the man's eager hands. "The southern kingdoms are quite eager for our northern furs, and they pay handsomely for quality goods. Excellent, excellent. And might I say, your timing is impeccable. Duke Aldwin is hosting a grand feast tomorrow night to celebrate his appointment. As the king's new advisor on trade matters, I'm certain he would be honored by your attendance." Tobias's smile never wavered, though inside he felt a familiar surge of cold satisfaction. Duke Aldwin's promotion was no accident. Tobias had been quietly manipulating trade agreements and political alliances for months to ensure it happened. Every piece was falling into place exactly as he had planned. "I would be delighted to attend," he said smoothly. "Please convey my congratulations to His Grace." As the harbor master bustled away, Tobias allowed himself a moment of genuine anticipation. Tomorrow night, he would finally be in the same room as the men who had destroyed Elena. And more importantly, he would begin the final phase of his carefully orchestrated revenge. That evening, Tobias made his way through Aldermere's winding streets to a tavern called the Silver Anchor. It was a respectable establishment that catered to successful merchants and minor nobility, the sort of place where important conversations could happen without attracting unwanted attention. He found his contact waiting in a private dining room, nursing a cup of wine and looking exactly as nervous as Tobias had expected. Sir Roderick Blackthorne was a minor court official with major debts and a gambling problem that Tobias had been quietly enabling for the past 5 years. "Master Reed," Roderick said, rising hastily as Tobias entered. "I wasn't certain you would come. I'm a man of my word, Sir Roderick, you know that." Tobias settled into a chair across from the nervous knight. "I trust you have what I requested." Roderick produced a leather portfolio with shaking hands. "Everything you asked for. Benedict Aldrich's travel records for the past 20 years, copies of his correspondence with noble families across the realm, even his private journal entries about his medical consultations." Tobias opened the portfolio and scanned the documents with growing satisfaction. 20 years of patient investigation had finally borne fruit. Here was the evidence he needed: proof of Benedict's travels, records of the children who had died, documentation of the healers who had been blamed. "This is excellent work," he said, producing a bag of gold coins that made Roderick's eyes widen. "But I need one more thing." "Anything, Master Reed. You've been more than generous with your investments in my future. Tomorrow night, at the Duke's feast, I need you to ensure that a certain conversation takes place. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would seem suspicious. Just a casual mention of Benedict's remarkable success in treating noble children across the realm." Tobias leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper, "and perhaps a suggestion that someone should write a book about his methods, documenting his travels and treatments for posterity." Roderick nodded eagerly. Of course, but may I ask, why is this so important to you?" Tobias studied the young knight for a moment, weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both charming and terrifying. "Let's just say that I believe in justice, Sir Roderick, and sometimes justice requires a little commercial assistance." The next evening, Tobias dressed with particular care for Duke Aldwin's feast. His coat was midnight blue, silk with silver embroidery, his boots polished to mirror brightness. He wore Elena's ring on a chain beneath his shirt, a simple band she had given him during their last meeting, when she had told him about the child she carried, their child. Marcus was here in the city, though they had never met. Tobias had watched from a distance over the years, ensuring the boy had what he needed while never revealing their connection. It had been agony, but necessary. A merchant with a secret bastard son was vulnerable. A merchant with a son who was the child of an executed murderer was ruined. But tonight, that would change. The Duke's mansion blazed with light and music as Tobias arrived. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting old trading partners and forging new connections. But his attention was focused on two men in particular. Duke Aldwin himself stood near the great fireplace, accepting congratulations on his new appointment. He was older now, his hair gone completely white, but his bearing still commanded respect. This was the man who had ordered Elena's execution, who had refused to listen to any evidence of her innocence. And there, hovering near the Duke like a faithful shadow, was court physician Benedict Aldrich. Tobias felt his pulse quicken as he studied his enemy for the first time in 20 years. Benedict had aged well, his silver beard perfectly groomed, his robes rich with embroidered symbols of learning. He looked exactly like what he claimed to be, a learned physician devoted to healing and wisdom. The perfect disguise for a monster. "Master Reed." Duke Aldwin's voice boomed across the room as he noticed Tobias's arrival. "Welcome, welcome. I understand congratulations are in order for your latest commercial success." Tobias bowed gracefully. "Your grace is too kind. I merely seek to serve the realm through honest trade. Honest trade that has made you one of the wealthiest men in 3 kingdoms." The Duke laughed. "Benedict, you remember Master Reed, don't you? He's contributed significantly to our understanding of Eastern medicines through his trading connections." Part 4. The assassin's conscience-eth silver dagger caught the moonlight as it slid from its sheath. Silent as whispered death, Raven Blackwood perched on the roof tiles like a creature born to darkness, her black leather clothing making her nearly invisible against the night sky. Below her, through the grimy window of the makeshift clinic, she could see her target. Marcus Thorne, though he called himself Marcus Ashford now, worked by candlelight, grinding herbs with the same methodical patience his mother had once shown. Raven had been watching him for 3 days, learning his patterns, mapping his routines, waiting for the perfect moment to complete her contract. It should have been simple. She was the best killer for hire in 5 kingdoms, a shadow who struck without warning and vanished without trace. Her reputation was built on efficiency, discretion, and an absolute lack of sentiment. Targets were targets, nothing more. She had ended the lives of corrupt nobles, rival merchants, unfaithful spouses, and political inconveniences with equal professional detachment. But this contract felt different from the moment she had accepted it. The client had approached her through the usual channels, a letter left in a specific tavern, payment made through intermediaries, instructions delivered by a nervous messenger who knew nothing beyond his script. The target was a healer operating in Aldermere's lower district, a man whose dangerous activities posed a threat to important people who preferred to remain unnamed. The fee was enormous, enough gold to buy a small estate and retire from the killing business forever. That alone should have made her suspicious. In her experience, only the most desperate clients paid that well, and desperate clients usually brought complications. She should have walked away. But the gold was tempting, and Raven had her own reasons for wanting to disappear from the world of shadows and blades. Now, as she watched Marcus work, she was beginning to understand why someone was willing to pay so much for his death. The clinic served the poorest families in Aldermere, people who couldn't afford the established physicians, who had nowhere else to turn when sickness struck their children. Raven had observed dozens of desperate parents bringing fevering babies to Marcus's door, and she had seen the relief in their faces when he managed to help. More telling still was what happened when he couldn't help, when a child's illness was beyond his skill. Marcus didn't simply send the family away. He wept with them, held them in their grief, and covered the burial costs from his own meager funds. This was not the behavior of a man who posed a threat to anyone except perhaps competing healers who charged higher fees. A soft cry from within the clinic drew Raven's attention back to the present. Through the window, she watched Marcus carefully tending to a young girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. The child was pale and trembling, her breathing labored, her lips tinged with an ominous blue that Raven recognized from other poisoning cases she had witnessed. The girl was dying, and Marcus was trying desperately to save her. Raven shifted position on the roof, her assassin's instincts warring with a growing sense of unease. She had killed many people over the years, but she had never murdered someone who spent their nights fighting death itself. "Please," she heard Marcus whisper through the thin glass. "Please don't take her too." His desperation was raw, genuine, heartbreaking. This was not a man playing at compassion for appearances. This was someone who cared so deeply about saving lives that losing a patient tore pieces from his soul. The girl's mother sat beside the narrow bed, clutching her daughter's hand and weeping silently. She was a serving woman from one of the great houses, Raven guessed. Her dress was plain but clean, her hands work-worn but gentle. The kind of person who had no voice in the world's larger affairs, but whose universe revolved entirely round the small life now slipping away. "Is there nothing more we can do?" the woman asked, her voice breaking. Marcus hesitated, then moved to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. He withdrew a small vial of pale blue liquid, the same substance Raven had seen him preparing for several days, always in careful, measured amounts, always with the focused intensity of someone working on something vitally important. "There's something," he said carefully, "an experimental treatment. It's untested on humans, but..." "Please," the mother said immediately. "Whatever it costs, I'll find a way to pay." "She's all I have. No payment," Marcus said firmly. "But I need you to understand, this could kill her faster than the poison. I don't know what the side effects might be. I've only tested it on animals." Raven found herself leaning forward, her professional detachment cracking despite her best efforts. She recognized the symptoms the child displayed: the blue lips, the labored breathing, the way her small body trembled with each heartbeat. She had seen them before, in other children, in other cities, children who had died while healers were blamed and executed for their murders. Understanding hit Raven like a physical blow. This wasn't just a random poisoning. This child was dying from the same substance that had killed Lord Edmund 20 years ago. The same poison that had been used to frame Eleanor Thorne. And Marcus wasn't just trying to save one little girl. He was testing an antidote. The implications crashed over Raven in rapid succession. Someone was still using the same poison, still killing children, still destroying innocent healers. Someone wanted Marcus dead because he was close to exposing the truth. Someone was willing to pay a fortune to stop him from saving lives. Someone who had probably been responsible for 20 years of murders. Raven watched Marcus carefully administer the blue liquid to the dying child, his hands steady despite the enormous risk he was taking. If the treatment failed, if the girl died, he would be branded as her killer. He was risking everything: his life, his reputation, his freedom, on the chance that he could save one innocent child, just like his mother had tried to save Lord Edmund. "How long before we know if it's working?" the mother asked. "Hours," Marcus replied. "Maybe less. If the treatment is going to help, we should see improvement within the first hour. If not..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Raven remained on the roof as the longest hour of her professional life crawled by. She watched Marcus pace the small clinic like a caged wolf, checking the girl's pulse every few minutes, adjusting her position, holding cool cloths to her fevered forehead. The mother never moved from her daughter's side, whispering prayers and lullabies in equal measure. When the child's breathing began to steady, when color started returning to her lips, when her eyes fluttered open for the first time in hours, Raven felt something crack inside her chest. Marcus collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with relief and exhaustion. The mother wept openly, clutching her daughter close. The girl herself looked around in confusion, weak but clearly recovering. The antidote worked. Marcus had just proved that every healer who had died for the poisonings had been innocent. He had proved that someone else was responsible, someone with access to rare poisons and the medical knowledge to use them effectively. Someone who was willing to murder children to protect their secret. Someone who had hired Raven to kill the one man who could expose them. Raven sheathed her dagger and began climbing down from the roof. She had made her decision, though it would likely cost her everything she had built in the shadow world. She was done being a tool for murderers who hid behind gold and power. Marcus was cleaning his instruments when she slipped through the clinic's back door, moving like a whisper of wind. He turned at the soft sound of her entry, his healer's instincts instantly alert to potential danger. "Who are you?" he asked, his hand moving toward a heavy pestle that could serve as a weapon. If needed, Raven pulled back her hood, revealing a face that was younger than her reputation suggested, but marked by eyes that had seen too much death. Her dark hair was cropped short for practicality, her pale skin bearing the small scars that came from years of dangerous work. "My name is Raven Blackwood," she said simply, "and I was hired to kill you." Marcus went very still, his mind clearly racing through possibilities for escape or defense. But he didn't run, didn't scream, didn't beg. Instead, he asked the one question that mattered most. "By whom?" "That's what I intend to find out." Raven moved closer, keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. "Someone paid me an extraordinary amount of gold to end your life before you could complete your research. Someone who knew exactly what you were working on and why it was dangerous to them, and you've decided not to fulfill your contract." Raven glanced toward the room where the little girl was sleeping peacefully beside her grateful mother. "I've killed many people in my career, Marcus Ashford, but I've never murdered someone who was saving children's lives. I'm not about to start now." Marcus studied her carefully, his healer's training making him naturally suspicious of anyone who dealt in death. "What do you want from me?" "I want to help you expose whoever hired me, and I want to make sure they never get another chance to hurt innocent people." Raven's voice carried a cold fury that matched his own. "Someone has been playing us all for fools, using killers like me, sacrificing healers like your mother, murdering children to cover their tracks. It ends now. Why? Should I trust you?" Raven reached into her coat and withdrew a leather pouch heavy with gold coin. Part 5. The Crown's Justice Princess Serafina Aldwin stood before the great stained glass window of her private study, watching the dawn paint Aldermere's rooftops in shades of gold and crimson. At 28, she was everything a future queen should be: intelligent, composed, and deeply committed to justice. Her auburn hair was swept back in an elegant braid, and her emerald gown with a subtle embroidery that marked her royal status without ostentation. What her subjects didn't know was that their beloved princess had spent the sleepless night reading documents that would destroy everything she had believed about her family. The leather portfolio lay open on her desk, its contents scattered across the polished wood like pieces of a shattered mirror. Travel records, correspondence, medical journals, witness statements, 20 years of carefully hidden evidence that painted a picture so horrifying she could barely comprehend it. Her father, Duke Aldwin, the man she had revered as the embodiment of honor and justice, had knowingly executed an innocent woman to protect a conspiracy that had claimed dozens of lives. The revelation had come through channels so unexpected that Serafina was still struggling to process how all the pieces had fallen into place. 3 days ago, a merchant named Tobias Reed had requested a private audience to discuss matters of mutual concern regarding the kingdom's medical practices. Such meetings were routine. Wealthy traders often sought royal endorsement for their ventures, but Tobias Reed had not come to discuss trade agreements. "Your Highness," he had said after the formal pleasantries were dispensed with, "I believe you are a woman who values truth above comfort. What I'm about to show you will challenge everything you believe about your family's honor, but it may also give you the chance to prevent future tragedies." The documents he had presented were devastating in their thoroughness. Bank records showing suspicious payments made by court physician Benedict Aldrich, travel logs documenting his presence in every city where children had died mysteriously, testimonies from witnesses who had seen him near the victims shortly before their deaths. Most damning of all were Benedict's own private journals, stolen by an assassin-turned-whistleblower named Raven Blackwood. In his own words, the court physician had documented his crimes with the clinical detachment of a man recording routine medical procedures. The Whitmore boy proved resistant to the usual dosage, increased concentration by half again. Result: death within 6 hours. Local healer Marta Khan blamed and executed. Cover maintained. Young lady Penelope required careful timing due to family physician's proximity. Administered dose during morning lessons. Symptoms manifested during evening meal. Perfect confusion achieved. Healer Jonathan Swift eliminated. As planned. Page after page of cold-blooded murder recorded like livestock tallies. But it was the final entry that had shattered Serafina's world completely. Elena Thorne grows too close to discovering the antidote. Her research threatens the entire operation. Duke Aldwin has been convinced of her guilt through careful manipulation of evidence. Execution scheduled for tomorrow. With her death, the threat to our arrangement ends permanently. The Duke believes he serves justice, never suspecting he serves only my ambition. Serafina had read that entry a dozen times, each reading driving the knife of betrayal deeper into her heart. Her father hadn't merely made a mistake or been deceived by false evidence. He had been manipulated, used as an unwitting weapon by the very man he trusted most. A soft knock at her study door interrupted her tormented thoughts. "Enter," she called, quickly composing herself. Her lady-in-waiting, Dame Cordelia, stepped inside with the cautious bearing of someone approaching a dangerous animal. "Your Highness, the court physician requests an audience. He says it's urgent." Of course he did. Benedict Aldrich was many things, but he wasn't stupid. The network of investigators closing in on him would not have escaped his notice for long. He was probably here to spin some story, to cast suspicion elsewhere, to manipulate her just as he had manipulated her father. "Send him in," Serafina said calmly, and Dame Cordelia asked Captain Hayes to position guards outside my door, discreetly. If Cordelia found the request odd, she was too well-trained to show it. "Of course, Your Highness." Benedict Aldrich entered the study with his usual confident bearing, but Serafina's newly opened eyes could see the subtle signs of strain. Beneath his polished exterior, his silver beard was immaculately groomed as always, his physician's robes, perfectly arranged, but there was something desperate in his eyes. "Your Highness," he said, bowing with calculated precision, "I come to you with grave concerns about the security of the realm." Indeed, Serafina settled behind her desk, placing her hands carefully over the scattered documents. "What troubles you, Doctor?" "There are forces at work in the kingdom, dangerous elements seeking to undermine the crown through lies and fabrications." Benedict moved closer, his voice taking on the urgent tone of a man sharing state secrets. "I have reason to believe that enemies of the realm are spreading false accusations against loyal servants of the crown." "What sort of accusations?" "Wild claims about the medical treatment of noble children, suggestions that past tragedies were something other than the random misfortunes they appeared to be." Benedict's eyes flicked toward the papers on her desk, though he couldn't possibly read them from his position. "I fear someone is attempting to rewrite history for their own nefarious purposes." Serafina leaned back in her chair, studying the man who had been a fixture in her life since childhood. He had treated her scraped knees and childhood fevers, had been present at every important court function, had seemed like a kindly uncle figure dispensing wisdom and healing in equal measure. Now she wondered how many children had died while he wore that same benevolent mask. "That is troubling," she said carefully. "Perhaps you could help me understand exactly what sort of false accusations we're dealing with." Benedict's relief was visible as he interpreted her response as support. "Certainly, Your Highness. There appear to be suggestions that the unfortunate deaths of several young nobles over the years were somehow connected, that they were not the tragic accidents or illnesses they appeared to be. And why would someone make such claims? To cast doubt on the wisdom of your father's decisions, to suggest that justice was not properly served in certain cases." Benedict stepped closer to the desk, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I believe someone is attempting to rehabilitate the reputation of Elena Thorne." The name hung in the air, between them like a physical presence. Serafina felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her expression neutral. "Elena Thorne, the healer who murdered my brother." "Precisely. Someone is spreading the preposterous notion that she was innocent, that Edmund's death was part of some larger conspiracy." Benedict shook his head sadly. "It's clearly an attempt to destabilize the realm by casting doubt on your father's judgment." Serafina reached into her desk drawer and withdrew a single sheet of parchment, Benedict's own journal entry documenting Elena's impending execution. She placed it on the desk where he could see it clearly. "Someone like this, you mean?" The color drained from Benedict's face as he recognized his own handwriting. For a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped completely, revealing the calculating monster beneath. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. "From your private study, along with rather a lot of other interesting reading material." Serafina's voice remained calm, but steel had entered her tone. 20 years of documented murders, Benedict. 20 years of dead children and executed innocents, all in your own hand." Benedict straightened slowly, his mind clearly racing through options. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the kindly physician, replaced by something cold and sharp. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, girl. The stability of the realm depends on maintaining certain arrangements that require murdering children, arrangements that eliminate threats to the established order." Benedict's eyes glittered with a fanatic's certainty. "Do you think healing is some sacred calling? It's power, nothing more. The power of life and death, the power to influence the great families, the power to shape the future of kingdoms by killing innocents, by controlling who lives and who dies, who is trusted and who is blamed. Every healer I eliminated was a potential rival, a threat to the proper hierarchy." Benedict began pacing, his composure completely abandoned now. "Your father understood this, even if he never acknowledged it openly. He knew that sometimes innocent people must die for the greater good." Serafina felt something crack inside her chest. "My father knew. He suspected Elena Thorne was innocent. But he also understood that the alternative, admitting the crown had been deceived, that the real killer remained free, would have destroyed the people's faith in justice itself. Benedict smiled coldly, so he chose the expedient path. Just as you will I. Because if you expose this now, you don't just destroy me, you destroy your father's legacy, your family's honor, the very foundation of royal authority. Benedict leaned forward across the desk, his voice dropping to a hiss. And because I have taken certain precautions, even now, loyal associates are positioned near several families you care about. A word from me, and the poison that killed Edmund will claim new victim.